Well, welcome, and here we go, Onyi Nwabineli.
Nwabineli. Yeah,
There we go.
perfect. There
We
you
were
go.
practicing before we hit record, and I think I did okay, but not great. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to be talking to you, especially about your book, Someday Maybe. I will read a very brief intro, but then we'll hear the nitty-gritty from yourself about how this all came to happen and came to be. So you're a Nigerian British head wrap aficionado, which I'd love to
That
hear
is
more
me.
about.
Yeah, that
Born
is
in
me.
Benin, Nigeria. You grew up in Glasgow, the Isle of Man, and Newcastle, and now you live in London, all over the place.
Yeah.
Onyi is the co-founder of Surviving Out Loud, which I would also like to hear more about, which is a fund that provides fiscal support for survivors of sexual assault, and the founder of Black Pens, which is a writing retreat for Black women. Someday Maybe is your debut novel. So
Yeah.
welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, how did this all happen? How did this come to be? Where did this book come from?
Um, the book is actually kind of like a love letter slash gift to a close friend of mine who lost her spouse a long time ago to suicide, unfortunately. And in the midst of like support, well, trying to support her through that grief, I kind of packed my bags and moved in with her for a little while to offer some in-house support. And feeling helpless as always, asking her things like, what can I do for you? How can I help? And after a while, she was just like, oh, I actually would, I think you should write about this. And I said no and kept saying no for a long time because I just didn't feel qualified and I didn't feel best placed to write about losing a spouse because I have never lost a spouse before. But you can't really say no forever in those kind of circumstances. And that's all she wanted from me. So I kind of put pen to paper, and what I gave her in the end, it was not a novel. It was very short. It was kind of like stream consciousness, stitched together vignettes of just grief and loss. But she loved it so much that she kind of bullied me a little bit further and said, go away and do something with this. So I came up with a plot, characters, and everything, and that's how Someday Maybe was born. It's entirely fictional, but it is basically for my friend. That's how it came about.
So I want to hear more about you specifically, but before I ask, I would love to know just, so was she, and maybe this is too much personal information, and if it is, feel free to tell me so, but did she, was it a surprise? Was there any, because Quentin died, Eve is so surprised by this, like just
Yeah.
completely taken off guard. Was that true to life?
I mean, her spouse did was quite vocal about his struggles with mental health, but it still was came as a shock. And he did leave a note. As we all know, Quentin had different views on that. So yeah.
Okay. So tell us more about yourself. What brought you where I know you have a 9 to 5 job as well on top of
I do.
being a writer. So tell us all about sort of like bringing like how you got to be a writer.
I've always loved books. I've always loved writing. I've been scribbling since I was able to hold a pencil. I've written stuff that will never see the light of day and it's just filed away somewhere. But I think during like the first lockdown, during this whole pandemic, this book, which was called something completely different and looked a little bit different than what it looks like now, my friends and family had kind of been pressuring me a little bit, like, listen, now is the time. Polish it up and send it to some agents and see what's out there. The worst that can happen is that it's a no. So what actually happened is that Graydon House, who actually ended up publishing the book, were holding an open call for unagented Black writers. So I sent in the first, I think, 50 pages of the book. And this is before I found my agent. They were inundated with submissions. So they didn't end up getting back to me till like a good 4, 5, 6 months later. And they were interested in reading the rest of the manuscript. By then, I had my agent. So Amy, who's fantastic. And she, Kat, who's my editor at Graydon House, said, Amy, when you're ready for submission, could you please send it to us? So it's kind of like it came full circle. It's kind of like kismet. Kat's fantastic. My UK publishers are also fantastic. And Amy is just stellar. So I think if it wasn't for the pandemic and lockdown, I don't know whether or not I would have found the courage to send this out there. So yeah.
Amazing. And so you do have a 9 to 5 job, and is that in the writing field as well?
It is not, it's a tech job. So
Wow.
quite stressful. Yes. Yeah.
That's even more amazing to me though, because like your writing is so poetic and so beautiful. So like it makes sense if journalists or people who spend their days writing go on to write books, but when you meet somebody who has a completely different job from and then can write like you can write, like you're right, it was meant to be. It's like it's this book is such a special book. It's
Thank you.
incredible.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it is, writing's always been an outlet for me. And yeah, I at first I thought maybe I wanted to go into a field like journalism or something when I was younger and considering it, but I kind of fell into the tech world and I'm good at what I do there, but writing will always be my first love. So yeah.
Well, that's such a great story. I love that. I love hearing silver linings from the pandemic as well.
Yeah.
So when you wrote those 50 pages and then they wanted the rest of it, how did you already have it finished, or was that like, oh no, now I'm in trouble?
No, I did have it finished. I did have a full manuscript. I was tweaking it with Amy, but yeah, it was all there. I just needed to tidy it up and then go through the submission process with Amy at the helm, which is exactly what happened. And yeah, Braden House and Harlequin and HarperCollins, they ended up preempting. So that was fantastic. I was expecting so many rejections from agents and from publishers, and that is not what happened. And I am so grateful. So yeah.
So this is one question that our viewers always love to know. And how long from start to finish would you say that it took you to write this book?
Please don't be discouraged when I say this. It took me about 6.5 years, but the second book has not taken me anywhere that long. So yeah.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear there's a second book.
There is a second book. There is one coming. So yeah.
We'll touch on that before we leave you, but back to the book. So the Igbo language and culture is an important aspect of this novel, and can you tell
Yeah.
us why it was so important for you to include that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very Nigerian. I'm Igbo through and through. You can't really differentiate me and my character from Igbo and Nigeria as a whole. Anything I write is going to have elements of Igbo culture in it. It's just who I am. It's how I was raised. My entire family is Igbo. It's just part of me. And so it was very important for me to reflect that through different kinds of customs like food, like funeral rites, just like language, and introduce people who may not have known anything about Igbo or Nigeria at all, and see how even when we're dealing with an immigrant family, how that those roots still extend through their lives in various ways. Um, it's true for me. My family are immigrants. I was born in Nigeria, but moved here when I was very, very young, and it's just something that I'd like to preserve as much as I can. And my writing is the tool that I use to do that. So, yeah.
And I do have to say, there's some beautiful Nigerian writers. Do you have any favorites?
And Nigerian writers, there are actually quite a few. Obviously, Chinua Achebe, who is the godfather of
Yeah.
Nigerian books. Like I can't say anything else. That's just who I love. There's a number of different authors that are actually up and coming now. So obviously we have one of my absolute favorite is Akweke Emezi. They write all kinds of genres. They write poetry, they write literary fiction, they write memoir. They just released the most recent book was a romance, which did extremely well. They are prolific and they haven't written anything bad. I would read their shopping lists. Anything that they publish, I will write. So yeah.
Very good. Thank you for that list. So I'd love to know what your friend thought after she read the book.
She wept and she loved it. And if she didn't like it, again, nobody would have read the book. So I needed her stamp of approval before anything happened. But thankfully, she loved it. So I'm grateful to her as well.
Can we just speak about Quentin's mother for a few minutes?
Oh,
What a wonderful character. How is that wasn't based on anybody, that was just to complicate things further.
it wasn't based on a single person. It's based on many people, and unfortunately, people like Aspen do exist, especially when you venture forth into like upper class, wealthy, traditional English backgrounds. Unfortunately, characters like Aspen are quite prevalent in that kind of society, and you know, she is a bit of a villain. No, there's no denying that, but when I've been having, discussing with book clubs and so on and so forth, I've tried to point people and in the direction of the humanity that she does have. It does exist, if very limited, but it does exist. She's very isolated. Eve is surrounded by so much support and love, and Aspen has nobody. She's by herself. She doesn't really have friends. Her husband's gone. Her only child is gone, and the one person that loved her child as much as she did has iced her out. So she's she's lashing out. That's part of being human. We don't always get things right. So yeah.
So do you think if Eve had approached it differently after Quentin died, I know she couldn't, she didn't have the capacity, but if she had have approached it differently, then things would have gone very differently, because wasn't Aspen always like that with
Yeah,
her?
I don't think that things would have gotten differently. I don't even think that even if Quentin married someone else that wasn't Eve, but that was not hand selected by Aspen, that the relationship would have been much different. Aspen wanted Quentin to marry the person that she chose for him so that she could keep him close, and because she wanted him close. And he broke away from that kind of traditional background and said, no, I want to do things my way. And I fall in love with this person, and not just with her, but her whole family. And I think, Aspen took that as a rejection of herself and everything that she had gone through. And so yeah, I don't think that if Eve had been all sweet and nice, after Quentin's death, I don't think it would have changed much. Aspen is who she is. So yeah.
It was really interesting for me because I went through, I mean, nothing that extreme, but I went through something similar with an Englishman actually and his mother. So so
See.
it's interesting to read that part of it. I was like, oh my goodness.
Oh God, I hope it wasn't too triggering.
No, 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 no. I mean, I've moved way beyond it. It's fine, but it was just it's funny because it was an English mother as well. So
Englishmen are, I mean, they're great, but they're also a bit mad. So I understand.
Um, so the story is obviously incredibly sad. It touches on some very, very deep themes. How did you do your research for the book?
A lot of it is just lived experience. Like, I haven't lost a spouse, but I think everybody in this world has experienced death and loss and grief in various forms. So a lot of it just came from personal experience. But I also did read books and articles about losing someone, and it's specifically a spouse. And then I had to do a lot of research just around suicide and mental health, and that was hard as well. And I did have to take breaks while writing this, which is why it took so long to write, because it does get heavy when you're dealing with those kind of deep that deep kind of subject matter. So death is already a huge thing. Then it's death by suicide, so that's a massive thing to deal with. And then the aftermath of that, and all the questions that people ask themselves. And I've heard Eve is a very polarizing character. Some people love her, some people absolutely despise her, some people are frustrated by her, and all of that is deliberate, because at the end of the day, she's human, and how she reacts is probably not how many of us would react, but is or don't feel like we're allowed to react. But I've had lots of people reaching out to me to say, I don't know whether or not you're a widow, but you nailed, you got it absolutely right how I felt going through this. So, and that every single one of those messages really touches me, because that's all I wanted. If it resonated with one person, then my job is done. So
Um, Part of the book that I enjoyed a lot was when she went to the Isle and it was the Isle of Man, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And escaped her family, and it kind of didn't make any sense at all, but I thought that that was what was like that was what was so poetic about it, is that it wasn't supposed to make any sense, and she was just like going to that retreat like it.
Yeah. She just wanted to be, I think it was important for her because it's fantastic to have support and to know that you can lean on people when you need it. But sometimes, especially if you're an introvert, I'm a big introvert, I do most of my thinking and make most of my decisions when I'm alone. And I think she needed that room to breathe and start discovering again who she was, outside of Quentin and outside of her family. And she had this big decision that's kind of resting on her shoulders, this, big life changing thing that's happening to her. And she needed some space to decide, okay, what am I going to do going forward? Am I going to stay in this? Who am I going to be? Um, and yeah, I think that distance is required sometimes to be able to make those kind of decisions. So
Was the baby always part of it from the beginning?
absolutely, yes. I always knew. Yeah.
So like I said, the book, the story is incredibly sad, but at times very light and humorous. Was that hard? Was that a hard balance to achieve?
Do you know what? I think it was an important balance to achieve. I needed to inject levity into the book at times because otherwise, I mean, it's still a very heavy book, but otherwise, I feel like people would have come out of it depressed, completely depressed at the other side. And again, it's it's reminiscent of real life, right? Like you can be going through the worst thing that's ever happened to you, and your best friend might just say something stupid and you'll be laughing, and it's jarring. You might feel like, oh my God, how can I be laughing at a time like this? But it's those little things that remind us of who we are and how we're loved and actually set us on the path towards healing. So I think it was important for me to include those moments in there just to remind people that this is actually what happens in real life. You can't, like, even if you're dedicated to being sad 100% of the time, it's not possible. So,
Yeah. So as a debut author, how has the publishing experience and then the tour, the book tour, and I mean, you at least got to do it after the pandemic mostly. How's that
yeah,
experience been?
absolutely surreal. I still don't believe it half the time. Like, even doing something like this, I'm still shocked when anyone wants to talk to me about my book. I don't know why. But it's been fun. It's been surreal. It's been tiring with everything else that I have to juggle. But again, so grateful because it just means that people are responding to something I've put out there, and so I'm thankful every single day that I get the opportunity. So
I do have to ask that a book like this will have, I mean, your Goodreads rating is very high, but
mhm.
obviously with really heavy themes, you're probably going to encounter a bad review from time to time. Do you read your reviews?
No, I don't read anything on Goodreads. I will read. Lots of people do tag me in their reviews on social media, though, and I try not to read all of them, but some will slip through the net. And at the end of the day, everyone's like entitled to their opinion. And I think this is the kind of book that also has to find you in the right headspace and at the right time. Um, I wouldn't recommend anybody reading this when they are in the throes of the immediate aftermath of losing somebody. I really would put a trigger warning on that and be like, you might want to wait. Um, but yeah, everybody responds to art in different ways, and everybody is entitled. People are entitled to hate the book, so it's fine if they don't like it. Yeah.
But and I think that it was like for our community, we did put a trigger warning on it, but also the fact that you write on the very back, this man has committed suicide. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
right there. If you read the, I mean, I don't even read the synopsis all the time. I just dive right in, but
Yeah,
if you
it's
take the
there.
time.
Absolutely.
So tell us more. So you're doing a lot more than writing, although we do want to hear about your next book coming out, but tell us a
Mhm.
little bit more about Surviving Out Loud.
So, Surviving Out Loud is something I co-founded with another close friend of mine, and we just saw. we are both survivors ourselves, and we just saw, especially in the UK, there's just this lack of support for survivors, and most survivors just need somebody to talk to. And so the majority of the funds that we raised were to provide therapy, so to pay for therapy sessions for survivors, but we also provided fiscal support for legal advice and temporary relocation for domestic violence or sexual assault within the home. And the response was so overwhelming. It was There's so many people out there that need help or assistance, and so we're just kind of gearing up to see what more we can do. But and we also, as part of that, we also took a portion of the funds that we raised and we donated them to 3 UK nonprofits that help women's charities. And one we donated directly to help some people with their legal expenses following taking their abuser to court, and other bits and pieces like that. So it's something that's so important, but the therapy aspect, I just there's like the response, we still get emails say thank you, like you changed my life. I wouldn't have been able to access a therapist without this. So it's a really important thing.
That's amazing. And I mean, I think about the parallel in your book and how many people you've helped with it. How many people have read it and have really got something from it. It's
Yeah.
like, I mean, the reach there is so incredible. And then about Black Pens, which is writing retreats, is that right?
Writing retreat, that's correct. So again, I feel I find myself being bullied quite often about things because I tweeted very innocuously that I wish a writers retreat in the UK existed for Black women, because there's tons in America, but there's nothing here. And I hoped that somebody would make one. And then on the back of that tweet, everyone was like, oh, yeah, you should make one. And I was like, that's not what I meant. I meant somebody else should do the work, but that's not what happened. So last year we had our inaugural retreat in the summer on the hottest days of the year, and it was outstanding. And the demand, I could not keep up. I still can't keep up with the demand. But this year we're having 2 retreats, one in summer, one in autumn, and I'm hoping to continue to grow. I don't think I'll ever be able to meet the kind of demand that has come on the back of Black Pens, but I will do my best to keep expanding as much as I can.
Well, retreats are hard work. I know that firsthand.
Yeah, yeah, they are.
So we'd love to know more about authors or books that you love specifically or that are favorites of yours.
I've been saying this in all my interviews this year, but one of the best books I've read this year, and it has like leapfrogged into my top 10 of all time, is Gabrielle Zevin's Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. Love it. Love it so much. I don't know what it is. I think it's probably because of it doesn't really deal with romantic love, and it deals with platonic love, which is my favorite thing in the world. So that's one of the things that I adored. I've read lots of other amazing things that are on the verge of coming out or just come out, things like Rootless, which I think is a powerful story, that people about motherhood and about tradition, African tradition, that people I think will resonate with a lot of people as well. I love that. Um, and I think one of my kind of favorite books of all time that I talk about is a book called Fremont by Elizabeth Reader. And I've never read anything like it. And before I read it and since I've read it, I've just never read anything like it. I adore that book. And I wish everybody could read that book. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
I'll be sure to put all these books in the comments below and with the URL to find them, as well as the link to Surviving Out Loud and Black Pens, so people can find out more about both of those as well.
Brilliant.
Please tell us, what are you working on now?
So I'm currently working on a new novel, and it is very, zeitgeist type novel. So it's about social media. It's about children and social media. So, well, not necessarily children, children as they move into adulthood and social media. And it's It's not, it's hilarious. It's funny, like Someday Maybe is funny. So it deals with serious themes, but there is humor that runs throughout the book as well. And there's again my Igbo and Nigerian culture that runs throughout the book as well, and actually influences the dynamic between family members within that story. So keep a lookout. I'm sure there'll be more announcements coming out soon, but that's what I've been working on.
So you don't have a publishing date yet?
I don't have an announceable publishing date yet.
Okay, okay. We won't put
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for writing such a beautiful book, and sharing it with the world. And I
You.
can't wait to see what comes next.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you.